Well, as we begin our study, or the stuff we're going to go over here on Wednesday nights, we had been in the spring talking a little bit about discipleship, but we're going to continue to talk about the nature of how it is God and His wisdom has given to us that we might better understand how it is we're to approach the life that we have, approach the things that we deal with, the things that come up during the normal order of life. And so I wanted to start off tonight by reading 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and particularly focusing on verses 9 through 11 as the Lord has given us His Holy Scriptures. So again, in chapter 4 of 1 Thessalonians, as you probably heard me say before, 1 Thessalonians is written to a church that Paul holds quite dear in his life. Thessalonica was a church almost all of Gentiles, which was unique amongst the churches of Christ in the Mediterranean. And many of the issues that the Thessalonians faced were born out of this Gentile context of dealing with the kind of Greek idolatry. Ian and Owen C. and Leela and I didn't particularly know that Owen and Leela were going to be there. But the four of us went and saw the Odyssey last week. I didn't realize I was going to be the adult who let everybody in, but such is things. And but of course, the Odyssey is all about Greek mythology. And the thing about Greek mythology is that it is based on real events, real things that actually happened. Right? There was actually a real Odysseus in real life, just as much as there was a real Achilles, and all of these things. One of the great discoveries of archaeology was the city of Troy, which forever everyone just assumed was made up, but it was discovered there in the western part of what's now Turkey. And so when we approach these people in Thessalonica, we always have to remember that they live in a context where everybody believes in God. But not everybody believes that God has the same power, has the same authority, has the same ability. I don't want to spoil the Odyssey. I mean, it's only been out for about 4,500 years. But one of the scenes in the Odyssey, the poem that Homer wrote, is they land on this island where the cows that belong to a certain god are hanging out. And you're not supposed to eat God's cows. Now, anybody want to hazard a guess as to why you're not supposed to eat God's cows? Because they belong to God. They don't belong to you, right? Well, as they're on this island, Zeus has asked Poseidon, and everybody remember their Greek mythology. Who's Zeus?
Zeus is the king of the gods.
Right, he's the king of the gods, right? And who's Poseidon?
King of the sea.
King of the sea, right? Now, one would think that Zeus could just do whatever he wanted, right? Because he's king of the gods. But is that how that works in Greek mythology? No. All right, they got to make deals with each other. They got to work with each other. And so Zeus asked Poseidon to keep the trade winds blowing against the island so that they can't get off the island. Because we're in the age of sail, and if you want to get off the island, which way does the wind need to be blowing? Out to sea. Well, as the... well, yeah. Remember not to take Kelly if we need to figure out how to operate the boat. But the fact of the matter is that Zeus has to ask Poseidon for help in doing these things. And when you're living in a world where gods are powerful but not all powerful, it can be hard to understand that the one true and living God is all powerful. Not only is He all powerful, but He rules by His providence. Now, providence is a word that we use all the time. And if you look at your sheet there, we have a catechism question 11. Now, one of the things I'm going to start doing is ask y'all to read things for me. Anybody want to read question 11?
What are God's works of providence?
You want to read? You can read the answer too.
Okay. God's works of providence are His most holy, wise, and powerful, preserving and governing all His creatures and all their actions.
All right. So, according to our catechism, Westminster Shorter Catechism, God's works of providence are His most holy, wise, and powerful. All right. So, what we're told here is that God's actions are holy, wise, and powerful. Now, when you hear the word holy, what do you think about? Set apart. Right? You know, something holy, it means it's been set apart. What do we usually identify as holy? God. You know, God is holy. And what particular things in the Bible are holy? The Word is holy, like God's Word is holy. It's set apart for His people. You know, you think of the temple, right? It's set apart. Yeah, and when you think also about the nature of the Lord Jesus, right? Well, how would we describe Jesus? He's holy, right? Now, when we think of holy, we also think of something that's without blemish, right? Something that does not have sin, that does not have any error in it. So God's works of providence are holy. They are set apart, they are without blemish, and they are always good. Now, the second detail we're given there is God's works of providence are not only always good, but what are they? Wise. Now, what makes something wise? Now, we know some wises, right? You know, we know Gary and Ian and others, right? But what makes somebody a wise or wise? Knowledge. What's that?
I said
Maturity. Experience. So it's a knowledge, maturity, experience. Those things are associated with wisdom, certainly in the book of Proverbs. Yeah, and what else would you kind of classify with somebody who's wise? Old.
Follow God's ways.
What's that?
They follow God's ways.
They follow God's ways. Educated. Yeah. Would you call somebody who's wise patient? Yeah. Somebody who's wise has self-control. You know, somebody who is wise does not operate like most of us do. You know, we operate by the seat of our pants. Right? Wise people, they plan things, right? They think ahead. Right? They think about the decisions they're making right now and how those decisions are going to affect next week, next month, next year, the end of their lives. Right? There's a long-term focus with people who are wise. So when you think of God's works of providence, not only are they holy, right, they're good, but they are given by somebody who not only knows things, not only is old, right, but somebody who knows the future, right, who knows the long-term reality of things. So holy, wise, and then we're told that God's works of providence are powerful. Well, what makes someone powerful? Authority, right? The ability to do things, or the right to do things, I should say.
Knowledgeable.
What's that? Knowledgeable, right? Knows how to use power. You know, it's one of the things that, you know, they do at football practice, right? They teach kids how to use their power, right? How to take the hands and put the hands in the right place in order that they can push somebody back, right? Because if you're an offensive lineman and you've got a guy running at you and you got your hands out like that, out wide, right? What's going to happen? They'll run by you, right? Because and then eventually, what are you going to do with those hands which aren't in the right position? You're going to grab, and what happens when you grab somebody who's trying to run by you? You get a penalty, right? You get a yellow flag thrown at you, and you get a 10-yard holding penalty, right? You got to know where to put your hands, and you got to know how to use your hands, right? You know, power in itself is not sufficient. There has to be knowledge attached to the power. You know, one of the ways the Proverbs describes this is somebody who has zeal without knowledge. Right? Why are people who are zealous without knowledge so dangerous? They react before they think. Right? You know, they're gung-ho, but they don't know what they're gung-ho about. And they don't know how to be gung-ho. Right? We had a saying when I was in the military that went by the phrase, good initiative, bad judgment. You're doing things before you think about it. Somebody who is powerful, who is holy and wise, knows how to use that power. So when we think of God and his works of providence, we hear that everything that God does is holy, wise, and powerful within the limits of who God is. And when we think about that, right, how does he use these works of providence? Well, the next part of the sentence says, to preserve and govern. All right, so think about those two words. What does it mean to preserve something? To save it, keep it alive, allow it to prosper. When we think of preserves, what do we think about? Grandma, right? Yes. Yeah. What is a preserve? Something's going to last a long time, right? Yeah. Usually fruit. We usually think of fruit preserves. You can can just about anything. And the idea is, especially back before refrigerators and stuff, you spent the fall canning the harvest so that you could do what? You could eat through the winter. Right? You were preserving not only the actual fruit and vegetables, but you were preserving yourself through the winter. Right? Now, why were you preserving yourself for the winter? So you could stay alive. Right? But what were you hoping to stay alive for? The next year, right? Everything that was done in the fall was for the spring. And everything that was done in the spring was for the fall, right? There's a rotation to everything that you do. Everything you do now is for the future. Not for tomorrow, but for long-term thinking. So when we think of God's works of providence, they're holy, wise, powerful, and they're done to preserve, but also to govern. Right? Now, when we think of governing, what do we think of? Managing, right? What makes somebody a good governor? What do good governors think about? The people. Right? When we think of a good governor in the Bible, who do we think about? Moses. Right? Now, was Moses always a good governor? But what we see out of Moses, and one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible is where Moses, of course, who's writing the book of Numbers, says, who was the most humble man in the days of Moses? Moses, right? So, it's kind of one of those things, right? When you're writing the Bible, you can say things like that, right? But of course, what makes Moses humble is that for example, when it comes to governing, right? One of the ways we see the humility of Moses is when he's trying to run everything by himself. After they've left Egypt, Jethro, his father-in-law, comes up to him and says, "Hey, you can't do that. One man cannot lead a kingdom by himself." And so you remember, what does Jethro tell Moses to do in Exodus 18? To delegate. To get godly men, men who would serve well, who understood their calling, and to assign them to be over the tribes. And then in the tribes, there would be men who were assigned to take care of the family groups. And within the family groups, there would be men assigned to take care of things, right? We see a Republican structure, small r Republican structure in Exodus 18. Here's Moses. He's in charge of everything. But he listens to counsel, right? He listens to somebody who tells him, you're doing this wrong. And he's not arrogant. He's not foolhardy. He listens to what the man has to say. So when we think of a good governor, we think of somebody who listens. Now, it's kind of strange to think about that in the context of God, right? Because who does God listen to?
He listens to our prayers.
But he listens to our prayers, certainly.
But we don't tell him what to do.
Right, we don't tell him what to do, right? So when we think of God listening, right, one of the things we need to think about is that God listens to himself. Now, that seems kind of obvious, right? You know, do y'all talk to yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Do you listen to yourself? Sometimes, right? But when we think about God listening to himself, one of the things we need to think about in that context is that God is always consistent with himself, right? God is never going to tell himself to do something that is not consistent with who he is. Now, again, that sounds a little confusing, but it's helpful to think about that because God is humble. God is wise. God is all-powerful. God preserves and governs all his creatures in holiness, wisdom, and power. Not only does he govern his creatures, but what else does he also govern? Their actions, right? So when we think of God's governance over us, his providence over us, he not only governs us as creatures, but he governs our actions. Now, does that mean God is up in heaven like a marionette? Not the marionette, they're the thingamajiggers. A puppet master, there you go. Like a puppet master, right? You know, he lifts up his right finger and my foot goes up in the air, right? That's not how God governs his creatures. That's not how he, governs our actions. But when we think about, again, the nature of this, when we think of God's power over us, his holy, wise, and powerful, preserving, governing his creatures' actions, we need to think again about the difference between the idolatrous false gods that the Thessalonians are working with and the one true and living God. And so let's go ahead and go to 1 Thessalonians 4, 9 through 11 as we think about this. Verse 9 it says, "But as touching brotherly love, you need not that I write unto you, for you yourselves are taught of God to love one another. And indeed you do it toward all the brethren which are in all Macedonia. But we beseech you, brethren, that you increase more and more, that you study to be quiet, to do your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you." So, as we think about God's providence, as we think about his holy, wise, and powerful preserving and governing all his creatures and all their actions, we think again about what God has taught us to be and to do. Right? Again, Paul's writing this letter to a church. And what is a church made up of? Sinners. Right? Church is made up of sinners. What do sinners do? Sin. And what is Paul warning them against? Sinning. And he's particularly warning them here about brotherly love. Right, now think about that phrase. Right? Now the fancy word of that is Philadelphia. Right? That's what brotherly love means in Greek. Right? If you look at the Greek 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 9, you'll see the word Philadelphia. Now, I can't remember when we talked about this, but it was that.
I don't remember you talking about it. I think it was a Sunday night.
Sunday night, okay. When we think of Philadelphia, do we think of brotherly love?
No.
Right? If you think of Philadelphia, you think about Eagles fans booing Santa Claus and, throwing crime and just like. Have any of y'all ever been to Philadelphia? Yes. Yeah, Philadelphia is a unique place. You remember the scene in National Lampoon's Vacation where he gets off the interstate in St. Louis and is like driving through a bad neighborhood and trying to ask directions and things, and a guy stands up and says, "I'm not Christopher Columbo," and all that. Well, that happened to me in Philadelphia one time. I had a girlfriend in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and I was driving from Quantico, Virginia up to Allentown to see her one Friday night, and it was like midnight, 1 o'clock. It was late. And this is long before GPS and all that kind of stuff. I had printed directions off the internet and I had them stapled in my passenger seat. Well, I got up 95 there in Philadelphia and just completely got lost. And I am in a neighborhood in Philadelphia that you're not supposed to be in at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I could not figure out for the life of me how to get out of Philadelphia. And so I saw a bus parked. And so I parked my car in the middle of the street in Philadelphia. It tells you how wise I was when I was 18 years old. And I got out of the car and I knocked on the door of the bus and asked the public bus driver in Philadelphia how to get the interstate. And he started laughing really, really hard. And he was like, follow me. And so he started his bus up and he led me to the interstate. It was the craziest thing. Anyway, the reason why I tell that story is that you don't think about Philadelphia brotherly love, but what did that bus driver show to me? Brotherly love, right? And what other words would we describe for that bus driver that he showed to me? Compassion, mercy, grace, like all the adjectives that we would describe exactly the kind of thing that Paul is talking about here, right? It's easy for us to show brotherly love to people that we know. Maybe not always. Sometimes it's harder to show brotherly love to people we know. But one of the things that Paul is encouraging the people at Thessalonica to do is not only show brotherly love to those within the church at Thessalonica, but to who else? Everybody in Macedonia. And in the midst of this, you notice, again, the context in verse 11, part of the way that we show this gospel mercy and grace to the people in Macedonia is in verse 11. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but it tells you that the best way to show brotherly love is to study to be quiet, to do your own business, and to work with your own hands as we commanded you. Now, that needs to be some people's life verses. Because what do some people do when they think they're showing brotherly love? Put their nose where it don't belong. They're more worried about everybody else's lives than what? Their own life. And why are people like that such a trouble within the church, particularly? They stir pots. They run off good leaders. You see that a lot in the church. And so why is it important for us to, as Paul says there, study to be quiet, to do your own business and the work with your own hands as we command? Mind your own business, right? That's a biblical idea. Because the fact of the matter is, when we negatively think about this, right? One of the greatest examples of this in the Bible is David. David's greatest sin that he commits is because what is he not doing? Minding his own business. He's not where he's supposed to be. He's not doing what he's supposed to do. And because of that, idle hands are the devil's playthings. And he sees Bathsheba bathing. Now, when we think about this not only in the context of God's providence, you think again about the holy, wise, and power of God. God has given you enough things in your own life to deal with and take care of. And if you're doing that, what are you going to find out? You don't have time for everybody else's trouble. But also, if you're taking care of yourself and you're taking care of your own home and you're taking care of your own church and you're taking care of these things, you'll actually find that God in His providence will allow you more opportunity to show brotherly love. Because if your house is in order, what does that allow you then to do? You have a lot more time and energy and focus to be able to take care of other things. That's one of the reasons why Paul, when he's laying out the duties and responsibilities of elders and deacons, is he says both elders and deacons, one of the attributes that we're to look for in an elder and a deacon is what do they have under control? Their own homes. Right? Because if an elder or a deacon is spending all their time worried about everybody else's homes and their own home is a mess, what does that lead to? Lack of trust, lack of authority, lack of ability to set aside the family home in order to go take care of something. Right.
It goes back to the log in your own eye.
Well, log in your own eye, right? Yeah, because this is one of the things too, right? I mean, this is something that we talk to all the time with young ministers and with ministers in training, is that when you're called to office in the church, whether it be a minister, elder, or deacon, there's going to be more pressure on your time and on your family life than if you're not an elder, a minister, or a deacon. And that's why it's imperative, especially for ministers, that their own houses be run well. Because, if you're a first responder, let's say, if you're a police officer, or a fireman, or whatever, all right, is that a 9-to-5 job? No. So, it doesn't work out that all crime happens between 9 and 5 and all the criminals go to bed and all that kind of stuff. All right. Same thing with fires, right? When does most crime and most things of that nature take place? After midnight, right? That was
That's inconvenient.
and so that means, if you're going to be a first responder, if you're going to be a minister, your household needs to be running well enough that you can drop what's happening and go and take care of whatever it is that needs taken care of. And I mean, that's one of the reasons, when we hear what Paul says here, in the context especially of discipleship, this is why when we see not only officers in the church, but individuals within the body of Christ, so much focus placed on your own walk with Christ before your worry about everybody else's walk with Christ. That's why it's so important, as we see in kind of the next section there, we need to be willing and able to order our own minds and souls over and above the busyness of everything else going on in the world. Because the fact of the matter is the busyness of the world going anywhere? I heard somebody say one time, work is always going to be there. And so when you're home, where do you need to be? You need to be home. Now, that's not always easily said, but why is that so important, that work's at work and home be home?
You gotta make time for both.
You have to put priorities. You have to make time for both. And sometimes that means, now this is funny coming from my mouth, but what do you sometimes have to tell work?
Well, he has something.
No, right? I'm slowly learning that. But the fact of the matter is, right, when we think about the orders of priorities in life, right, who always has to come first? God always has to come first, right? So when we're sitting down making our plan for the week, what receives priority? Well, God does, right? But under that, what receives priority? Worship time, private devotional time, community devotional time, worship, things of that nature, right? Because as you think about what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4, you think about the nature of study to be quiet, do your own business, to work with your own hands as we commanded you. You think again about this need, again, first of all, to make sure your soul's in order, because your household can't be in order if your soul's not in order. Your church can't be in order if your household's not in order and yourself is not in order. Right? Again, these things flow out of each other. And we can even think about this in the wider context of the culture in which we live today. What's the secret to fixing America?
They need Jesus.
Well, they need Jesus, right? That's most certainly the truth. Right. What fell apart first?
We're trying to take care of everybody else and take care of ourselves.
Right. I mean, that's one of my favorite warnings that George Washington gave there at the beginning of the founding of the country is whose stuff should we not get involved in?
Others.
Everybody else.
Everybody else's, primarily Europe. You know, and also, you know, there was a doctrine laid out earlier on in our history where we told Europe to do what? To stay over there, right? You know, let the Americas take care of itself. And every time there's a problem, what causes it? Not focusing, first of all, on the home front, worrying about everybody else doing things. And of course, worrying about everybody else doing things means that you make people mad that weren't mad before. And now you got to deal with mad people who weren't mad before because you stuck your fingers in their cookie jar, right? And all that kind of stuff. Now you think again about the nature of our nation, right? You know, the church did not fall apart because the nation fell apart. That's backwards. What fell apart first? We did, individually. Right? And then as we fall apart individually, what falls apart next? The family falls apart. And then as the family falls apart, what falls apart? The church falls apart. And then as the church collapses, then the nation follows after it. Again, we get it backwards, right? Because you listen to the news and what's the solutions that you hear? Government, right? We have to elect the right people. We've got to, now I'm not saying that's not important, but you know, what's the likelihood that by voting you're going to fix the United States? Yeah, that's, again, I'm not saying it's unimportant, right? We do need the right people in office. You need the right people running things. But, you know, one of the things that I notice nowadays, especially politically, is that the quality of the candidates that we have has not improved in my lifetime. Some of y'all are a little bit older than me, but the first presidential election I remember was 1984. That was the first presidential election I remember. Now, one thing I remember about that, one of the most famous quotes in political history is, Mondale and Reagan are having a debate, and the fella on the TV said something about, Reagan being old or whatever. And Reagan responded by saying, I will not hold my opponent's youth and relative inexperience against him. And of course, Reagan's like, 70 or something like that, which is kind of funny considering how old our presidents have been lately. And Mondale's like 65, right? He's not like, Jack Kennedy or something like that. But, there was an element of respectability and ability and capability, 40 years ago. Now, what do we see in the average, political celebrity, immaturity, all these things. Right? Now, the Bible tells us in Isaiah 2 and 3, we get the rulers we deserve. And Israel was warned about that because remember in 1 Samuel, what kind of king did they want? Like the nations, right? Now, the reason why I mention all that in the context of thinking about this is that if you want to disciple the nation, right? If you want to disciple the world, who needs discipled first? You do. You need to make sure that you're studying with your hands, that you're minding your own business, that you're working on your own walk with Christ. Because as you work on your own walk with Christ, it will affect that brotherly love that you show to those around you. And that brotherly love will affect everyone around you's walk with Christ. Right? It makes it a lot easier to disciple others if you've been discipled. Right? And on the same token, right, when the church is discipled, it makes it a lot easier to disciple Clover if Bethany is discipled. Right? So again, it kind of builds from that. And we're going to talk some more about that as our weeks progress. And we'll go ahead and close on that. But any questions, comments, thoughts about all that?